Hey guys, Wyatt Claypool here. Hopefully, we are going to be seeing this longest ballot committee nonsense coming to an end in the fall session of Parliament. Pierre Poilievre and the Federal Conservative Party are pushing for legislation to be passed in order to prevent activists from flooding ballots with hundreds of fake candidates. In this video today, I want to talk a bit about that proposed legislation, as well as talk about the crushing hypocrisy of the Longest Ballot Committee. Because these people pretend that they care so much about democracy and they're just doing this activistic protest in order to get the system's attention and push for proportional representation or a single transferable voting system. They don't actually care about democracy and they really don't care about making these changes. They just care about harassing people who don't agree with them. Because as I will get into later in this video, they keep losing every single time one of these different election systems is put to voters in different provinces around Canada. But before we get into it, guys, if you like my political coverage, make sure to leave a like on this video, leave a comment on what you think about this whole situation, and subscribe if you are not yet a subscriber. But here is Pierre Poilievre on X talking about what the Conservatives want to see in new legislation passed this fall. Pierre Poilievre says Conservatives calling on the government to pass a law to end the longest ballot scam. See our letter. By the way, they can also use a private members bill to make these changes, but obviously parties don't usually like to give up private members bills because you don't usually get many of them. But I want to read through the recommendations they have in this letter and what they're calling for. Some of it I agree with, some of it I don't agree with, in the sense that it might be a bit of an overkill solution. But their first recommendation is raise the bar for candidate nominations by requiring 0.5% of the population in any given riding to sign, not just 100 people. So if you want to become a candidate, your nomination forms, you must have 0.5% of the riding's population sign on to a nomination form. Number two is require that each signature in support of a candidate be exclusive, with no signatory permitted to endorse more than one candidate in the same election. And then number three up here is restrict official agents to representing only a single election candidate at any given time. I actually think number three is pretty much all you really have to do. I would make a little bit of an addendum and also mention that candidates cannot be official agents for other candidates, because the way I would see the Longest Ballot Committee pivoting on number three is that if you sign up to be a candidate, you also sign up to be somebody's official agent, and then it just basically, becomes just a back padding circle where everyone is supporting everybody to become a candidate. I don't necessarily agree with the other things that Poilievre and the Conservatives are pushing for. The requiring 0.5% of the population of any given riding to sign, not just 100 people, is a little bit much, because some of these ridings have 140,000 person populations. And so if you need 0.5% of those people to sign, that's going to take you a while, considering that even if someone supports you, they may not necessarily want to sign the form. They may mess up signing the form, or your volunteers may not be very good at getting people to sign the form. They're not pushy enough about it. Maybe they forget to mention it. I really just think we could just raise the signature requirement to 250. That's pretty doable for one person in 2 or 3 days if you're serious. And then the saying that requiring each signature be exclusive may be a bit much, because there's tons of people out there who will never sign anything. And I don't think it's a bad thing that if a liberal, a conservative, and a green candidate come to the same door, that person signs for all of them, because, you guys are all serious candidates. I'll sign for you. I would actually, another recommendation I'd make, I wouldn't actually put in number one or number two. Maybe you can raise the signature requirement a bit, go from 100 to 200. But one thing I would recommend is that if you're going to run in a riding, you don't have to live there. I don't care if you live somewhere or not, because you end up in these weird situations where you can't run in a riding, even though basically that riding's boundary is right across the street from you. I think if you're a serious candidate, you can run wherever you please. But I think you should have to show up in person in that riding. I think you should have to go to a district office within that riding, or maybe set up in the closest large municipality, like in a place like Battle River Crowfoot. It's a large riding, so maybe you can have a district office in Calgary people can go to, and then there's another office in there that Elections Canada can verify that you're the actual person who wants to run. I think that would clear this up immediately, because it's going to be very hard in most ridings to find 150 idiots who want to put their name on a ballot as fake candidates. It's easier when your draw area is the entire country. But if you then require someone in Newfoundland to show up and actually prove that they're a serious candidate, they're not going to do that, because that's a large cost to show up for a joke. And that's not, you can't reimburse for that. Or, and again, I actually like the Japanese method, where what you do if you're a serious candidate is you pay $3,000 to run, and maybe we could make it that the donation limit to your own campaign, if you're the candidate, can be raised to this limit. But if you're going to run, you give Elections Canada $3,000, $4,000, $5,000. The amount could depend on whatever we figure out. But you get certain amounts of guaranteed advertising. A Canada Post is going to deliver a piece of your literature to every single household in the riding. If you put that money down, you're saying, I'm serious. I want people to know about me. I'm actually going to hit the doors. And yes, put me on a bunch of billboards, put me on some, send my literature to voters in the riding. That would be a good way of solving all this. Actually requiring a certain barrier of entry that denotes that you're serious. I know people are arguing, well, some people who don't have a lot of money may want to run for office. It's like, then get some donors. It's not difficult. If you're saying that nobody believes in you and you can't even scratch together a couple thou to run, then don't run, honestly. Unless it's like a small town mayorship where you probably don't even need to spend anything. When it comes to federal office, you probably need more than 30 people who actually believe in you, who are willing to give you some cash. But anyways, now I want to get into what is the stupid hypocrisy of Longest Ballot Committee. Because these people will lash out at anyone who says that they're being horrible, and that, or people who, I had one of their people attack me because I nearly said I just don't really have any sympathy that someone threw a rock through your window for constantly putting your name on all these ballots around the country. Should people do that? No. Am I shocked? Do I feel bad for them? Not really. It's just something that's going to happen when you're effectively harassing people around the country. Oh, I'm not harassing people. You're harassing people. I'm just one name on a ballot. No, you're encouraging other people to sign up. This is very difficult for scrutineers to actually look over. It's very difficult for people to count the ballots. It's especially difficult for people. The average person is more difficult to vote. Imagine if someone's old, has bad vision, someone has mobility issues, and now they have to vote on a 2-meter long ballot, like what will probably end up occurring in Battle River Crowfoot. No, you're harassing people. But I want to get into the idea that they're just pushing for proportional representation. The system isn't listening to them, and so they have to do this in order to get their message out there. Okay, well, there's been 3 provinces where they have had referendums on electoral reform. And you will not be shocked to hear that in all 3 provinces, in sometimes 3 referendums in 2 of them, they lost every single time. Let's start off in probably what should be their best province to do something like this. Maybe you could argue on the 3rd one we're going to get to, maybe better. But in British Columbia, they have had referendums on electoral reform 3 times. One time in 2005, second time in 2009, third time in 2018. And they lost every time. So on May 17th, 2005, which was the same date as the provincial election, naturally it's smarter to do a referendum when more people are turning out to vote anyways. The question was, should British Columbia change to be BC STV electoral system as recommended by the Citizens Assembly on Electoral Reform? STV is single transferable vote, and that basically means that after the first round of voting, if nobody's at 50%, whoever's candidate didn't get above a certain percentage, or basically you get everyone whose candidate is like below a certain percentage, your second vote goes to the next person. And so then if the person who was in first and only had like 35% the first time, then has 42% the second time and is still leading, they win. if they had more than 50% on the first ballot, they automatically win, obviously. It's a bit of a complex system, but in 2005, they actually did the best. The yes vote for changing this got 57.69% of the vote, which is impressive. No got 42.31%. But the thing that you have to know about this referendum vote is that the yes side got to advertise. That organization that was mentioned above, the organization, the Citizens Assembly on Electoral Reform, they had a budget. They were allowed to go around marketing why people should vote yes. And so when you see a bunch of signs saying, vote yes for electoral reform, vote for STV everywhere, naturally it's going to become the default choice. And they still didn't win because you needed to get 60% of the vote, because naturally we're not going to change the electoral system based on a 51 to 49 margin and some people just slept in that day, or there was a rainstorm in the north and a bunch of people against it didn't show up. You're going to need to have a decisive result. And they didn't have it, despite the fact that the yes side was the only side that was allowed to actually campaign. They were the only ones who had an official campaigning organization going around pushing for their side of the issue. And so Gordon Campbell, who at the time, the Premier of British Columbia, who could have just said, no, you lost fair and square. In fact, you lost not even fair and square. You actually had every advantage and you still lost. That we'll rerun the referendum in 4 years at the next provincial election. But with the stipulation that the no side also gets to be able to spend money. So what they did is each side, the organization that had the most obvious clout as the main organization pushing for this. So the organization that collected the signatures the first time to get this on a referendum ballot, they got $500,000 from the government. And the no side that had the most support in terms of their own fundraising and signatures and members and whatnot, they got to represent the no side and got to use the money. And actually, the no side was represented by someone from the NDP. So, like, the yes side is usually NDP and the no side was NDP. This wasn't, like, political in the sense that, like, a bunch of BC Liberals were showing up to vote no, but all the NDP and the Greens were showing up to vote yes. In fact, usually politicians supported the yes side outside the BC Liberals because it was like it was a good look at the time. And in 2009, they got absolutely walloped. The existing electoral system, first past the post, got 60.91% of the vote. It actually got the supermajority that if it was flipped, the result was flipped, that would have actually changed the system. They just needed to prevent the yes side from getting to 60, but in fact, they got to 61%. Single transferable vote electoral system got only 39.09% of the vote. Well, maybe there was just not enough public education on what they were pushing for. Well, they did another vote in 2018, this time on having proportional representation. What they were going to do in 2018, there was first a vote on do you want to change it, and then the second vote is what would you want it to be changed to. But the what do you want it to be changed to didn't even really matter because they got absolutely walloped again, even harder. A proportional representation voting system got 38.7% of the vote, and the current first past the post system got 61.30. So yeah, not exactly setting the world on fire. You better start just dumping fake candidates on ballots because apparently the system's not listening to you. These guys don't care about voters. They don't care about what voters are telling them election to election. The voters don't like the change. The closest they got was in a dishonest election where nobody even knew what the no side's position was, and the entire province got flooded with vote yes propaganda. So you even in that one couldn't win. But let's go west to east. Let's go to Ontario. Ontario election reform referendum, which jumped on the bandwagon that was started in 2005, and they had one take place in 2007. And so they basically asked people what the electoral system should be: mixed member proportional representation and first past the post. Mixed member is basically having like mega districts in which based on the percentage of the vote, that district will elect certain people. It's proportional representation with a little bit more of a spin on it. So it's not just you get the exact proportion of the vote in the province. You need a specific percentage of the vote in a specific region in order to elect MPPs, and which makes sense. If you're going to do something like this, it should be like Toronto and Northern Ontario. Like you should basically have a concentration of support. Although I find the proportional representation people hypocritical because they talk so much about how we need proper representation, but then they have all these stipulations, but no, we need a 5% threshold and it's going to be regionalized and then we're going to do this and that. It's like, do you believe in proportional representation or not? Or is it because you want to change to a system that benefits your current favorite party? Because you'll notice a lot of people who like proportional representation are people who vote for the NDP, for the Green Party, or the PPC. It's parties that, yeah, technically would get seats if you change the system, but can't actually prove that they are popular in a concentrated area. They've never actually tried to expand their appeal. They've never worked harder at campaigning. They just basically say the election rules are not helping them. It's like, okay, well, this has been the system. You knew what you were running in. The PPC, by the way, I believe they spent more than $12 million since they became a thing in 2018. Not a single seat won. Imagine if they concentrated that money over time and started really hitting Northern Ontario or Southern Ontario, or they just jam money into Maxime Bernier's riding a Beauce, or somewhere in Saskatchewan, somewhere in Alberta, somewhere in Manitoba, like Portage Lisgar, and they just put money there constantly, talk to people constantly. They had a headquarters set up there. Everyone knew who they were. No, they just fart money around every 4 years and they don't get anything done, and mostly it's just paying big salaries. But in this election, again, in Ontario, in 2007, first past the post won with 63.18% of the vote to 36. Now, maybe the proportional representation people are going to start whining and saying, well, this means that 36% of the voting system should now be proportional representation. But whenever something is truly democratic, a vote where to change the system, you just got to get to 60% because it's a big change. You got to show that a lot of people are on board. It's not just a fluke. They can't handle it. They can't win with a position that they will tell people is super, super popular. But now let's go even further east. Let's go to a province we don't talk about as much, and that is PEI. So they've done quite a few of these, actually, quite a few referendums over time to change the system, and none of them have done very well. When was the first one? It's sometimes hard to find when they've done the first ones. I can at least show you. I think they've done like 2018, 2019. It's pretty massive. Okay. I think, yeah. Let's start in 2005 because then they did one in 2016, then 2019. So in 2005, in the great province of Prince Edward Island, who also has a great flag, by the way, Prince Edward Island referendum on electoral reform. Should Prince Edward Island change the mixed member proportional system as presented by the Commission on PEI's electoral future? No, 63.58% of the vote. There's a bit of a pattern emerging on how little people like this. Let's jump ahead to 2018 or 2016. This one was a little bit odd where they kind of like, they have like a, basically you would vote in the first round on which system you liked the most. And yeah, so like it's kind of a bit odd. Like first past the post actually still wins in this thing, 31%, with the next closest being mixed member proportional representation. And when it went to the vote on which one they want, mixed member got 52.42 and first past the post got 42.84. Now, I also blame a little bit of this on just the way that it's all pitched. It's a very complex question, and even in that question, it's a fairly indecisive result where if you actually see how it works, look at this. 52 plus 42, to my knowledge, and I'm not very good at math, is 94%. So either a bunch of people didn't fill out another option, or they just scuffed their ballots because it's too complicated. But then when you jump ahead to 2019, which I will bring up in just a second here, in 2019 was the redo. Let's have a straight question between two options. Let's not make it too complicated. What do people want between the mixed member and the keeping it the same and making it the current first past the post? So electoral reform referendum, April 23rd, 2019. Should Prince Edward Island change its voting system to a mixed member proportional voting system? And remember, this is the same question in 2005. They already lost. And then in 2019, they still lost. No for changing it got 51.74% of the vote. Yes got 48.26%. So my thing with the Longest Ballot Committee and their shenanigans is these people don't care about democracy. It's only democracy when they win. They haven't been winning these referendums, so ergo, it's the system or the establishment that's holding them back. I had a guy argue with me on X the other day saying, well, the only reason that the referendum side, that the pro-reform side, hasn't been able to win is because there's a lot of money in the first past the post lobby. It's like the first past the post lobby, I didn't know that existed. By the way, did I mention in 2018 in British Columbia when the pro-reform side got walloped the absolute hardest? Do you know who endorsed the yes side? It was not just Sonia Furstenau, the Green Party leader. It was, in fact, John Horgan, who was then to become the next premier of British Columbia. The Liberals got destroyed in that election. Well, not quite destroyed. It was very close. But considering it was close, but the Greens and the NDP, in terms of the popular vote, won by quite a wide margin, it demonstrates that not only did the BC Liberals all vote no, but a large portion of the Greens and the NDP would have also voted no. So these people who are usually more on the progressive side of politics, who think their positions are super popular, have been proven to time and time again that people don't agree. People don't want to change the system. It's the system we've had for a long time, and simply changing it doesn't just make things more fair. Changing the voting system changes a lot about politics, especially if we were pure proportional representation. If you can get 0.23% of the vote in Canada, you get a seat, because that, if we take 343 seats and we divide it by 100, or divide 100 by 343 seats, that's how much you need. Do you really think we're just going to have the same parties that we have now running? Or do you think everyone's going to start a party? Not like literally, I'm being a bit hyperbolic, but do you think the Christian Heritage Party is now going to put a candidate in every single riding, or they're going to try and make sure their party is on the federal ballot? Because if they get 0.23% of the vote, they already basically get that without even running candidates in every riding. Wouldn't they try a little bit harder in order to get a few Christian Heritage MPs? Wouldn't a lot of parties try a lot harder because now suddenly you can get an elected MP for not that much trouble? That's the problem. I think electoral systems are trying to get us coherent governments. Proportional representation does not get anything coherent. I have never liked the idea that we are going to overrule 42% of people who all voted for one thing with 52% of people who didn't actually all vote for one thing, but 27% of them voted for the Socialist Party, and 14% voted for the Green Party, and 5% voted for the Democracy Party, and another 8% voted for, animal welfare or whatever, because that's what goes on in proportional representation systems. Even when they have a threshold, it just becomes chaos. Nothing ever changes, because every time someone gets tired of voting for the socialists in Spain, and this is how it works, Spain has basically had a socialist government since the 70s. Every time people get sick of the socialists, because people have egos naturally, they don't want to say, well, I've been voting wrong. They're like, no, the party was just not doing it right. And so they vote for the Communist Party, or they vote for the Eco-Socialist Party, or they vote for Labor or whatever. And people don't just go from socialist to conservative. And so Spain has basically just been sitting in a stalled position for decades, since the 1970s, because the socialists can always cobble together a new coalition in the proportional representation system at the same time that the Republican and the conservative type parties in Spain are actually starting to beat them on popular vote. They get more popular vote than the socialists, but the socialists can cobble something together every single time. Anyways, so hopefully that wasn't too long-winded for you guys, but I think it's important for people to know these people do not have a righteous cause. In fact, they're losers who are upset that they lost in the past, and now they're here to take it out on the system because we won't just bend their will and reform the entire system in line with what a bunch of random idiots want us to do by flooding ballots. Anyways, so that should be it for me today, guys. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, do all that great stuff, and I'll talk to you guys later.